So look, by every measurable metric, this is pretty much the most advanced piece of wearable wrist technology that we have ever produced. But I'm going to argue that this wristwatch right here is something that pretty much everybody should own. And no, I don't mean that particular watch. Let me explain. So look, I'll be the first person to admit that from a purely functional standpoint, the traditional wristwatch is completely obsolete. I mean, everything tells the time. Your phone tells the time, obviously your smartwatch tells the time, your laptop tells the time. You don't need a dedicated device to just tell you what time it is anymore. And on top of that, a smartwatch is just going to be a lot more accurate. I mean, when you have a normal mechanical wristwatch, you're going to have to reset this thing every once in a while. And if it has a certain kind of movement, then you have to put a battery in every few years, or you might have to wind it up a little bit. Or, I mean, there's a bunch of things that are going to be nuisances when it just comes to timekeeping versus wearing a smartwatch. And yet there's still millions of people around the world, even in wealthy countries, who choose to wear a wristwatch, even though it really doesn't make a lot of sense on paper. And I want to point something out that's really easy to forget. At one point, this was a cutting edge piece of technology. See, before wristwatches, people carried their time in their pockets. Pocket watches, and they were bulky and they were pretty fragile, and maybe had to fumble around to grab them. And what's funny is a lot of people just use their phone in the exact same way, right? It's your timekeeping device and it's in your pocket, but whatever, neither here nor there. Then the radical idea came about: what if time was on your wrist instead? That way it wasn't bulky, it wasn't slow to access, and it wasn't fragile because it couldn't fall out of your pocket. It's always secured to your actual person. And look, that change from pocket watches to wristwatches wasn't about status or fashion. It was a technological shift. It was faster to access, it was more precise, and it was just a lot more practical. And as watches started to develop, pilots started to rely on them, and soldiers were using them during wars, and it wasn't just about telling time. There was all kinds of different other tools that they would integrate into a watch so that it couldn't just tell the time, but you could have a stopwatch on it, or you could track distance or depth, or all sorts of other crazy functions that you would never even think of when you think of the wristwatch. And during the 20th century, there was entire societies that were all synchronized together just through these independent little pieces of metal that encased springs and gears and gems, and it's actually pretty amazing if you think about it. And as time developed, then all of these watchmakers continued to push themselves to put more complications or features inside of their watch, or to make it lighter, or to make it more accurate, or more durable, or more stylish. And that was technology back then. And then they lost. First was the introduction of what's called the quartz movement, and this came out of Japan, and basically what it was a battery-powered watch. And as cool as it is to have something that's, this movement that doesn't have any digital parts or any electricity whatsoever, battery-powered watches, they were just more accurate and they were a lot cheaper to produce. So there's a good part of the watchmaking industry that ended up dying out just because of battery-powered watches. And then, of course, there was smartphones, and then finally smartwatches. And timekeeping went from something that was really special and integral to society to just being free and everywhere. And now we just completely take it for granted that we don't need a watch as a tool anymore. We just have it built into every other device that we carry on our person. So you would think that that would have killed the watchmaking industry, but something else happened. See, the Swiss watchmaking industry, which are, basically the companies and people who make these kind of mechanical watches, they stood at a crossroads and they said, well, we could either just lean into battery-powered watches or smartwatches and be with the cutting-edge tech, or we could double down and say we're not going to change. And they did the latter, but they had to change their approach and how they sold their watches. So clearly this wasn't the cutting edge piece of technology that it used to be, but it started to become a symbol. So a watch wasn't just a tool anymore, it just is. And to be honest, that's kind of the point. I mean, people don't buy watches anymore because they need to tell the time. They do it because it has some sort of personal meaning to them. And that can be anything. It can be the history of the watch model or just the brand itself. It can be that they think that it elevates a particular outfit or style that they have. It could be to commemorate, a moment, or it could be a gift to another person. And having these watches that have had so much care and history and just class that stands behind this simple device, that can remind you of a time when you received the watch and all of the memories that you've made while you're wearing it. It doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do next, but rather reminds you of who you were when you first put it on. And that's where I think there's this balance and this tension, because technology is always going to be about really becoming as invisible as possible. You want your phone or your smartwatch or whatever device you're using to be invisible. It's got to be so quick that it's indistinguishable from real life. It has to be so thin that it feels like you aren't even holding anything in your hand. But now watches have leaned into the opposite direction entirely. They've leaned into it being a statement, being a little bit more clear and obvious. It's about craftsmanship, and it's about the imperfection of something non-digital, and it's about tradition and paying an homage to the history that has gone into the devices that we now use every day. And what's beautiful about wearing a watch is that everything else, from your smartwatch to your phone, is going to demand your attention, and yet your watch only serves its purpose and then fades back into obscurity. And look, there are people with very expensive watches, and some people just buy them to, flex their riches and their wealth. And I guess if that's what you're doing, I don't really have anything to say to you. But you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to get something that, you're actually proud to own. There's a watch for every price point, with every kind of movement, that fits with every outfit or style, that has every kind of history, whether a brand new startup company or a company that dates back to the 1700s. And that means that there's a watch for every person and for every occasion. And I think that it's actually important for us to own something like this. And I'm not saying that everybody has to actually wear a physical wristwatch, as cool as I think that would be, but when every single thing that we're using on a daily basis falls underneath this very efficiency-centered philosophy of, do you have the latest iPhone? Do you have, the fastest computer? I think we might lose sight of some of the beauty in human engineering and what it is that we can consume and what we've created just as a species. A watch represents something that not only speaks to class and culture and history, but also just taking a moment to breathe and to appreciate time. The very thing that is so easy to take for granted and yet we're so dependent on and out of control of. And I think something like a wristwatch can remind us that technology shouldn't exist to control us or to optimize us. Sometimes it should just exist to reflect a certain part of who we are. And maybe that's why, in a world of infinite screens and notifications, the most obsolete piece of tech on your wrist just might be the most human thing that you own.